What's up, guys? Welcome back to Zilla MMA. I am your host, as always, the Zilla. I want to start this episode like I do every episode, and that's by thanking you guys, the viewers. Really means the world to me that you're watching. Even if you're just scrolling through, please go subscribe. We're really trying to grow the subscriber count here. Give the video a thumbs up. I really appreciate all of you who have given positive feedback. Let me know you really enjoy the videos, that they're really helpful in breaking down the fights. That means the world to me to hear that. If you have any suggestions about what we can do in future videos or questions about what I'm doing in the videos, please leave them down in the comments. I guarantee you I'll get back with you. Really appreciate all the viewership, though. It's more than I could have ever dreamed for this. So really appreciate you guys, but we'll go ahead and get into this card. I know we're getting this out a little late this week for a few reasons. Number one, going in, breaking down these 14 fights, just not that many fights on this card that I'm crazy about. It's not the best card in the world. But there's a few that I'm looking forward to, a few that I enjoy here. The other thing, just a lot of moving parts on this card. Really weird card where there's still a few fights we're not 100% sure are on or off. There's been a few late replacements on this card, so we'll see how this goes, but I'll go ahead and give the breakdown with the information that I currently have. And we'll go ahead and start with the first fight, which is Charles Johnson versus Rafael Estevam. Estevam coming into this spot as a slight favorite at minus 145. And Charles Johnson here definitely has an experience advantage. He's been very active since joining the UFC, fighting now 6 times in the past 16 months. And has also definitely faced tougher competition in his career. Not getting much of a break here, though. This is a tough fight against Estevam. I think Charles Johnson definitely is the better striker. He's going to have the benefit on the feet. But we're going to see him struggle if this gets to the ground. We've seen him struggle in the past when fights get to the ground, like his fight with Mokaev and Durden. Both those guys really good at wrestling. The question is, do you really think Estevam's on that level yet? And I'm not saying he can't be, but I don't see him on that level as of right now. And even if he can get Charles to the ground, Charles does a good job getting back to his feet. And for those reasons, I'm actually going to take Charles Johnson in the spot as my first dog. I'm going to take him by decision. Not a lot of dogs on this. Actually might be my only dog on this card. We'll see as we go along, but we took some risks on some dogs last week. Didn't pay off for us. Looking at this card, I could see it being very similar. There's a few fights with very close lines, so we'll see how that goes going forward here. Next fight, we have Nicholas Mata versus Trey Ogden. Mata coming in as the slight favorite here at minus 135. And I'm not really that high on Mata. He's a decent boxer, has a lot of power in his hands, but that chin is just made of glass. We've seen it taken advantage of in the past here. The thing in this fight, though, he may be getting very lucky with this matchup, fighting Ogden, who doesn't have a single knockout in his career to this point, which is crazy with the amount of fights he's had in his career. Ogden does have decent striking. Doesn't have that much volume, though, and he seems to be a good fighter on the ground, but he just doesn't really have the wrestling to get it there, it doesn't appear. And so I think he's going to have to if he wants to win this fight. A difficult one to predict, but I think that this is a matchup that's going to favor Mata. Just the fact that there's no knockout threat, really, at least from what we've seen in the past. And any opponent that he faces that wants to beat him needs to have those kind of tools in their arsenal, be able to take advantage of his weaknesses. So I'm actually going to take Mata to get the KO here and win this fight in this spot. Next fight, we've got Lucy Pudilova versus Alan Perez. Perez, slight favorite here, decent favorite at minus 200. And the spread's a little wider than I would like it to be because I do think Pudilova has an edge on the feet. If this fight stays at a distance, I actually think Pudilova could land some strikes, steal around, but I'm just not really convinced it's going to go that way. I think Perez does a good job closing the distance, getting close, landing the takedowns, and going to work with their ground and pound. I think that's the most likely way this is going to go. Now, Pudilova has done a lot to improve her ground game and showed it off in her last couple of fights, but I don't see it being at the level of Perez at this point in her career. And I think it's going to be a bit of a mismatch in strength as well. I think Perez definitely has a strength advantage in this fight. Yeah, just a fight where the price tag isn't right for me, but I do think Perez manages to get this decision here. So the pick for the show will be Perez by decision, but not anticipating I'm going to include her much in my bets this weekend. Moving into our next fight, we've got Lucas Alexander versus Jaka Seregi. And Alexander is minus 500 coming into this fight. A difficult line for me to get to. Alexander is a very sharp striker. He does do a good job staying on the outside, landing his shots, mixing in the kicks well. But Sergey is also comfortable at range, likes to use his kicks. The striking is just not comparable between the two, though. Alexander definitely has the edge in that category. Sergey could threaten a submission here, and Alexander's certainly vulnerable to that, but I trust Alexander's ability to keep this fight where he wants it. He's going to be able to dictate where this fight takes place. He's going to be able to land his shots, so he could get a finish at some point in this fight, but I just see him outlanding through the 3 rounds and getting the decision. So the pick for the show will be Alexander by decision, minus 500, a little rich for my blood. Then we've got Mick Parkin versus Kyle Machado. Parkin coming in here at the favorite as minus 375. Another one, don't love the prices, especially at heavyweight, but I do prefer Parkin in this spot. He's got pretty disciplined striking, good job mixing in his kicks, and Machado will throw with him, but I think he's a little too wild, leaves himself open to being hit. And I actually think Parkin has better wrestling as well. So this isn't a fight I'm rushing to the window to bet. I'm not super impressed with either of these fighters, really, if I'm being honest. But I do think Parkin is better, and I'm going to take him in this spot. I actually got to take him by decision. So Parkin in that matchup. And then we have Christian Leroy Jenkins versus Dennis Tolulin. I believe this is one of the later replacements. No line available the last I checked. It looks like I do have one on this graphic showing Leroy as a minus 300 or so favorite. Yeah, not available in my book as of yet, but maybe out there in some places. Seems to be a smash spot at this point. Duncan and Tolulin just not on the same level. Duncan has some real creative, unorthodox striking that I just don't see Tolulin being able to match. I see Duncan catching him probably pretty early in the fight and finishing this. So for me, I'm going to take Duncan in this spot. Let's go ahead and take him by KO. Yeah, early in this fight. Probably going to take him by KO here. Next fight, we've got Chad Anhilger versus Jose Johnson. Johnson the favorite here, minus 200. And Chad, I like what I've seen in his striking game. He uses the feints effectively to open up his opponent to land the big shot, but he doesn't seem all that polished defensively in his striking game to this point. Seems pretty hittable from what I've seen. And being as hittable as he is probably going to make this a nightmare matchup, just dealing with the height and the length that Johnson's going to have in this fight. Now, I know there's a little bit of fear about Johnson, a loss to Twister to Blackshear in his debut. That's kind of a tough look, but I don't see him facing anything like that in this fight. I mean, hopefully he'll be able to stay at a distance, show off his hands, and I anticipate he's going to be able to get a stoppage here. This is one I actually really like. I'm going to take Johnson by KO in this spot. And then moving into one that's a really close matchup for me and also for the books, Jonathan Pierce versus Joe Anderson Brito. Pierce slight favorite here at minus 125. And Pierce, very athletic, very well-rounded fighter. His wrestling's probably his strongest skill set, but he's really flashed how impressive his striking can be in his last fight against Elkins. He used his kicks very effectively. It was a really impressive fight to watch. Went and rewatched that this week. Burrito's going to be a tough matchup here, though. He starts really fast. He's got heavy hands, and he's going to be really dangerous early in this fight. I'm going to give the edge to Pierce here, though, due to him being a little more measured in his approach. Burrito's going to have a chance to threaten the finish early, but if Pierce can stay smart, avoid the big shot, I think he'll win this fight. That being said, very low confidence pick here, but I am going to take Pierce in this spot by decision. Next fight, we've got another one. I'm not 100% sure as of now if this fight's on. but it's Medic versus Oralby. Um, Looks like they now have a lineup here showing around minus 150 for Oralby in this spot, and just a really weird set of events where Oralby has been added to the UFC roster now, apparently stepping into this spot after fighting an LFA just 3 weeks ago. But watching the tape, I'm actually really impressed with him. I think this is a really dangerous matchup for Medic. Um, Oralby appears to have pretty solid striking. He's got really good power. And it seems like he also has good wrestling and would probably dominate this fight if he gets to the ground, I think, just based on what I've been able to find in his footage. Medic definitely will be able to throw as well, but I'm not as confident in him defensively. I'm really concerned if I have money on him and Oralby starts landing. I don't know, the footage I've seen on Oralby, he chain wrestles. He'll get you to the ground. He'll land the big shots on the feet. Just everything I'm seeing from him. He's also very calm when fighting. It's actually a really good fight to watch. If you go and watch his couple of his most recent fights over in LFA, I was really impressed. Now, there's always that concern. He's not fighting guys of the caliber of UFC fighters. Definitely not anyone like facing Medic in this spot. But I don't know. From the tape I've seen, I like him. I think he could have some success in the UFC. I'm actually going to take him by KO in this spot. I think he's going to get the knockout here. Just really blown away. It's one of the better ones where we have one of these late step-ins and you go, oh, they're just throwing somebody in here, throwing him to the wolves. I don't think that's the case in this spot. I'm really impressed with what I've seen from this fighter. Moving into our next spot, Amanda Ribas versus Luana Pinheiro. Ribas the favorite here at Hebus, the favorite here at minus 240. And I actually kind of agree with the line here. I think she's a little bit better everywhere. I liked her grappling. She's much more polished on the feet. There's always a threat of the big shot on the other side, but I think Hebus can get this done. She's a little bit chinny. She can get hurt by a fighter like this, but I think she should be able to avoid it because the striking on the other side is just a little too wild and predictable. Just kind of some crazy overhand strikes that I think she'll be able to see coming. I'd really like to see Hebus here shoot and grind this one out on the ground. I think that's where she'd be the most dominant in this spot. But even on the feet, as long as she doesn't get clipped, I like her by decision here. So that's what I'm going to go with in this spot. Next, we've got Peyton Talbot versus Nick Aguirre. Talbot, the biggest favorite on the card at minus 850. And while I like him, I definitely think he's going to win this fight. Kind of an extreme line going against Aguirre. I think that's a little bit much. Talbot striking definitely looked really impressive in his Contender Series fight. Made me think this could be a mismatch on the feet, but he does have this creative striking style. I don't want to compare it. It's not at his waist like Bobby Green, but he keeps those hands down where it's kind of difficult to anticipate where the strikes are going to come from, but it also leaves you vulnerable to taking those shots, not having your hands up. I'm not sure Aguirre is going to be the guy that can take advantage of this. It could be a problem for him later in the UFC, though. He could threaten some on the ground. I would say Aguirre likely has an edge if this ends up down there, but I'm just not sure he has what it takes to get this fight to the ground, unfortunately. So on paper, I can understand this line, but Talbot in his UFC debut at minus 850 is probably not something I'm going to bet a ton of. I will take him, though, in this spot by TKO. This is probably the most interesting fight to me on the card, Jordan Leavitt versus Chase Hooper. Just because of the stylistic matchup, I think it's kind of an interesting fight to see. But keep an eye on this one, especially if you're tossing it in parlays. Leavitt expecting a child this week. I think 4 days after the fight is when his wife is scheduled. So it could be a late scratch. He's already made some statements about it that if she went into labor, he would not be coming to the fight. But in this spot, we've got Hooper here at minus 220, and surprisingly, I kind of get it. I'm not a huge Hooper believer. He'd been a joke around the UFC for a little bit. He's still very young. I'm not sold on his power, but this is really kind of a weird matchup where I think I might give him the edge on the feet. He definitely throws more volume, and he seems to be improving it his career develops. Like, he seems to be becoming a more polished striker. He's mixing in kicks. He's able to land at a higher rate. So maybe not the power of Levitt, but he could land more volume here. And while I would say Levitt probably has the edge grappling, if this gets to the ground, I give Chase the threat to finish with his jiu-jitsu down on the ground. I think he's definitely got more ways to win this fight. So I'm never going to feel super confident backing Chase Hooper, but I do feel like he has more paths to victory in this fight. So I'm going to take Hooper here. I'm actually going to take him by sub in this spot. I'm really rooting for the kid. I know we got thrown to the wolves at a very young age in the UFC. Still a very young kid, but I think he's heading in the right direction. I think he could start rattling off some wins if he continues on the path that he's going in now. So Chase Hooper by sub in this spot. Moving into our co-main, Jake Matthews versus Michael Morales. Morales coming in here as a pretty sizable favorite at minus 300. Matthews certainly not a bad fighter by any means. He's been in the UFC a long time. I think coming up on a decade now, but he certainly just has this ceiling to him where he just can't reach those top tier fighters. To his credit, he's developed a good bit in the UFC. Came in mostly as a grappler. Now he's added some really good looking boxing, but unfortunately, he just doesn't have volume with either his striking or takedowns to have me bet confidently on him. I just don't see a world where he can finish Morales, and without that volume in strikes and takedowns, it makes it very hard to get a decision. So there's just not that many paths to victory here for him. On top of that, I don't see Morales as one of those low-level fighters Matthews normally beats. I think he's a promising young prospect who should be able to win this fight either with his striking or maybe even landing some takedowns of his own. So I'm going to take Morales by decision in this spot. I think this favors him a little more than Matthews, unfortunately. But yeah, that's going to be my pick for this one. I'm going to take Morales by decision. And then moving into our main event, Allen coming in here against Paul Craig. Brendan Allen, the minus 425 favorite, and I'm just not loving this fight as a main event. I really don't see that much of a path for Paul Craig to win this outside of catching Allen in some kind of unexpected submission attempt. This might sound a little crazy, but his best avenue to victory here might be just pulling guard straight from the jump. I don't see a world where if he stands with Allen that this fight's going to last very long. I really don't think he's going to have a lot of success trying to take Allen down. I hope that Brendan Allen's smart. He keeps this on the feet because I really don't see him in any danger there. Well, if he takes this to the ground, there's always that threat of that sneaky sub with Paul Craig. But even there, I think he might be okay. And if Craig does survive, I feel like Allen has a way better gas tank here. And the gap between the two will only get bigger as this fight goes on. So, in my opinion, I actually think Allen's going to get the knockout pretty early in this, either in the first or second round. So, I'm going to take Allen by KO in this spot. And so that's going to wrap it up for this card. I really just don't have a ton of bets on this card, so I'm not going to release a full best bets video for this card. I'll go ahead and give you actually a little bit that I have at the that I'm looking at coming into this. I'll go ahead and give you my bets and my prize picks for this card. Like I said, I don't have a line yet on Oralby coming in here from LFA, but I do like him. I'm seeing the line's probably going to be around minus 160, minus 165. I'm probably going to straight bet him. Another straight bet I like in this is going to be Charles Johnson. Plus 120 is what he's showing on my book right now. I think that's probably the only straight bet I have on this card. As far as parlays, I have two of them. I have a 2-leg and a 3-leg. My 2-leg is going to be Alexander and Jose Johnson. That comes out at minus 130. And my 3-leg is Talbot, Morales, and Allen. That one comes out at minus 120. Looking it over at Prize Picks, I've got 3 plays I like this week. Jose Johnson, over 86.5 fantasy score. I think he should be able to get to that number. I'm anticipating he's going to get a finish in that fight. And then 2 unders on Fight Time, which is not something I typically like to do, but these are 2 spots where I think it makes sense. I'm going to take Mata under 12.5 minutes. I think he'll get the finish, and if he doesn't, I think he is finishable. So getting this one within the distance seems like a good one for me. And then, as we just talked about, I anticipate Allen's going to get this done early. Maybe Craig gets some kind of submission early. Who knows? But I think this is going to be a quick fight. I'm going to take Allen here under 7.5 minutes in that fight. And those are my 3 plays over on Prize Picks. So, guys, that's going to do it for this card. Not going to release anything else before the card on Saturday. I will obviously, as always, have my recap video coming out either Sunday or Monday, breaking down what happened in this card. But as I've already said, you're really appreciated. Love the viewers. Please like and subscribe so we can keep putting out this content. And until next time, guys, see ya.